When we lose someone we love, we often believe that our pain is a private experience, something that exists only within our own hearts and minds. The tears we shed, the sleepless nights, the overwhelming waves of sorrow, these seem like natural responses that affect only us, the living. But what if our grief creates something more tangible in the spiritual realm? What if our intense emotional suffering forms invisible chains that bind our departed loved ones to the earthly plane? Ancient wisdom traditions across many cultures speak of the interconnectedness between the living and those who have passed on. These traditions teach us that death is not an end, but a transition, a doorway to another state of being. The soul continues its journey, evolving and moving toward higher realms of consciousness. However, this natural progression can be hindered by the unresolved grief of those left behind. When grief becomes prolonged and all-consuming, it creates a powerful energetic tether between your consciousness and the soul of your departed loved one. This connection, formed by the intensity of your emotions, acts like a spiritual anchor that prevents the soul from fully transitioning to its next phase of existence. Your loved one, sensing your profound pain, may feel unable to move forward, held in a state of concerned attachment to your suffering. This concept was explored deeply by Edgar, who described how souls on the other side remain aware of and connected to those they've left behind. His readings suggested that excessive grief can actually create difficulties for the deceased, making their transition more challenging rather than easier. The soul, naturally compassionate and loving, becomes concerned with your inability to heal and move forward. Think of it as a mother who cannot rest while her child cries in distress. The departed soul, out of love, remains attentive to your sorrow, unable to fully embrace its own spiritual journey, while you remain in such profound pain. Your grief becomes their concern, your inability to heal becomes their burden. The energy of grief is particularly dense and heavy. It vibrates at a lower frequency than emotions like acceptance, peace, or love. When you remain locked in this heavier energetic state, you inadvertently create a field that your loved one's soul can sense across the dimensions. They feel pulled toward this energy, not because they wish to remain earthbound, but because their love compels them to try to comfort you, to somehow ease your suffering. This is not to suggest that grieving is wrong or that you should suppress your natural emotions. Grief is a necessary and important process, a testament to the depth of your love. However, when grief becomes chronic and unyielding, when it transforms from a natural response to loss into a permanent state of being, it creates spiritual complications for both you and your departed loved one. The invisible bond created by intense grief can manifest in various ways in your life. You might feel a persistent sense of your loved one's presence, as if they are lingering nearby. You may experience unusual dreams where they appear concerned or unable to rest. Some people report sensing their departed loved ones trying to communicate messages about moving on or letting go. These experiences, while often interpreted as comforting signs, may actually be indications that your loved one's soul is caught between worlds, unable to fully transition because of your unresolved grief. This understanding requires us to reconsider the nature of love after death. True love, in its highest form, includes the willingness to release. Just as parents must eventually let their children grow independent, we must learn to love our departed ones enough to release them from our grief. This doesn't mean forgetting them or diminishing their importance in our lives. Rather, it means transforming our relationship with them from one bound by grief to one characterized by loving memory and spiritual connection. The most profound act of love you can offer to someone who has passed is the gift of your healing. By working through your grief, by finding ways to honor their memory while continuing your own life's journey, you create the spiritual freedom they need to continue theirs. This mutual liberation is perhaps the final act of love exchanged between souls. The living giving permission to the dead to move forward, and the dead offering the living the space to find joy again. There is a profound spiritual truth that few understand. Tears shed in grief carry energy. They are not merely salt water and emotion. They are carriers of spiritual substance. When we weep continuously for those who have passed, our tears create a subtle yet powerful energetic density that can affect the spiritual journey of our departed loved ones. Throughout human history, many traditions have recognized the power of tears. Ancient Egyptian funeral rites included professional mourners, whose tears were believed to accompany the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. In contrast, Buddhist practices encourage acceptance rather than prolonged grief, understanding that excessive attachment creates obstacles for both the living and the dead. Every tear you shed in unresolved grief adds weight to the spiritual atmosphere surrounding your loved one's soul. This is not metaphorical, it is an energetic reality. The density created by continued mourning can make it difficult for the soul to ascend to higher vibrational states. Just as a balloon cannot rise when weighed down, a soul cannot easily elevate when continually pulled by the gravitational force of grief. This understanding doesn't diminish the importance of the natural grieving process. The initial tears that come with loss serve an important purpose. They honor the relationship, express the depth of your love, and begin the necessary process of emotional release. These early expressions of grief are healing and appropriate. It is the persistent, unchanging grief that refuses to transform or evolve, that creates spiritual complications. Imagine your tears as raindrops falling into a pool of water surrounding your loved one's soul. A few drops create ripples that the soul can navigate, but constant heavy rain creates turbulence and rising waters that make movement difficult. Your unending tears don't provide comfort to your departed loved one. Instead, they create a spiritual environment that feels heavy, dense, and restrictive. This heaviness manifests in the spiritual realm as a fog-like energy that surrounds the soul. Through this fog, they cannot clearly perceive the light and guidance that would naturally draw them forward on their journey. They sense your pain, feel the pull of your attachment, and find themselves unable to move freely toward what awaits them. Many who have experienced near-death states or profound spiritual visions report seeing deceased loved ones who appeared concerned or troubled by the excessive grief of those they left behind. These accounts describe souls who express a desire for their living loved ones to find peace, not only for their own well-being, but so the departed can continue their spiritual evolution without the weight of concern. There exists a delicate spiritual balance after someone transitions from physical life. Their soul naturally seeks to continue its journey, to integrate the experiences of the completed lifetime and move toward greater understanding and spiritual growth. Yet they remain connected to those they loved through bonds of affection and concern. When you maintain a state of inconsolable grief, you inadvertently tilt this balance, creating a situation where their concern for your well-being outweighs their soul's natural progression. This doesn't mean your departed loved ones are suffering in the conventional sense. The soul's experience after physical death transcends many of the limitations we face in embodied life. However, they do experience a form of compassionate concern when they sense your continued suffering. They wish to see you heal, to find joy again, to continue growing and experiencing life's gifts. When you remain fixed in grief, they sense this stagnation and feel a natural desire to somehow help you move forward. Consider how many spiritual traditions include rituals designed not just to honor the dead, but to formally release them. These practices exist because our ancestors understood the importance of consciously letting go. From lighting candles to releasing flowers on flowing water, these rituals acknowledge the necessity of creating spiritual space for both the living and the dead to move forward on their respective journeys. The spiritual mechanics of this process reveal something profound about the nature of consciousness after physical death. The soul retains awareness, love, and connection, but is meant to gradually shift its focus from earthly concerns to spiritual evolution. Excessive grief from loved ones creates a divided attention for the soul. Part of their awareness remains focused on your suffering, rather than fully embracing their continued journey. The tears that fall years after a loss, when they come from unresolved grief rather than momentary remembrance, create a different energetic signature than tears shed in the initial stages of loss. These later tears often contain elements of resistance to change, to acceptance, to living fully in a world without the physical presence of your loved one. This resistance energy is particularly dense and creates stronger attachments that can hold a soul in place. To understand this more deeply, consider that everything in existence, including emotions and tears, has its own energetic frequency. Higher frequencies, like those of acceptance, peace, and unconditional love, are expansive and liberating. Lower frequencies, including prolonged grief, resentment, and fear of abandonment, are contractive and binding. When you remain locked in lower frequency states, you create a spiritual environment that makes it harder for your loved one's soul to ascend to the higher frequencies that await them. This understanding offers a different perspective on healing from loss. Working through your grief becomes not just an act of self-care, but an act of love toward the person who has passed. By gradually transforming your pain into acceptance, your tears of sorrow into tears of grateful remembrance, you change the energetic quality of your connection. You create space for their spiritual freedom, while honoring the love you continue to share across dimensions. Among the most powerful forces that can tether a departed soul to the earthly plane are the words left unspoken and the emotions left unresolved. These silent energies, the regrets, the unexpressed love, the lingering resentments, the broken promises, create what spiritual teachers throughout the ages have described as unfinished business. This unfinished business acts as an invisible cord, a spiritual obligation that makes it difficult for the soul to fully transition into the next phase of its eternal journey. When physical life ends unexpectedly, conversations are cut short. Opportunities for reconciliation, forgiveness, or expressions of love may be lost in the material sense. Yet the energetic reality of these uncompleted exchanges remains active in the spiritual realm. Your departed loved one carries awareness of these unresolved matters, while you hold the earthly end of the connection through your own unresolved feelings. Consider how a promise made creates an energetic contract between souls. When life ends with promises unfulfilled, whether they were promises made by you or by the person who has passed, a spiritual tension remains. This tension seeks resolution. The departed soul, now free from many earthly limitations, but still connected to its life experiences, feels the pull of these incomplete agreements. They cannot fully release their attachment to worldly concerns, while significant promises or commitments remain in this state of suspension. Similarly, unexpressed resentments or unresolved conflicts create distortions in the energetic field between souls. These distortions make it difficult for the departed to perceive clearly the path that lies before them. Imagine trying to look through a window that's been warped by heat. The view beyond is distorted, unclear. This is similar to how unresolved emotional business affects the soul's perception of its forward journey. Your anger, blame, or unforgiving stance becomes a distorting lens through which they must try to perceive their spiritual path. Guilt is particularly binding for both the living and the departed. When you harbor guilt about your relationship with someone who has passed, things you did or didn't do, words spoken in anger that cannot be retracted, moments of care that were neglected, you create a heavy, energetic anchor. Your loved one, sensing your self-punishment and remorse, feels drawn to somehow relieve your suffering. They cannot easily move forward while aware that you remain trapped in self-recrimination over your shared history. Equally powerful is guilt that you may be projecting onto your departed loved one. Perhaps you believe they should feel guilty for leaving you, for decisions they made, for ways they failed you. This projected guilt creates a spiritual expectation that can hold them in a state of perceived obligation. Your unconscious demand for their remorse becomes a barrier to their spiritual freedom. The spiritual wisdom traditions teach us that souls after physical death enter a phase of life review and integration. During this process, they gain broader understanding of their life experiences, including greater compassion for their own mistakes and limitations. Yet when the living remain fixed in judgment or unforgiveness, this creates a discordant energy that interferes with the natural expansion of the soul's understanding. It's as though you're insisting they remain in a narrow perspective, that they are spiritually ready to transcend. Secrets kept between you and your loved one can also create powerful binding energy after death. Unspoken truths, whether they are expressions of love never voiced, hurtful realities never acknowledged, or important information withheld, create an energetic incompletion. These secrets have a quality of suspended animation in the spiritual realm, neither fully alive nor completely put to rest. They exist as active energy between souls, creating a sense of unfinished communication that can hold a departed loved one in a state of waiting. Many who work with grief in spiritual contexts speak of the phenomenon of hanging on to the departed through unresolved emotional business. This hanging on isn't just a psychological pattern, it creates an actual energetic tether. You may unconsciously believe that resolving the unfinished business would mean truly losing the person, so the unresolved state becomes a way of maintaining connection. Yet this connection, based in incompletion rather than love's natural continuity, serves neither your healing nor their spiritual freedom. The spiritual path forward requires a willingness to address these unspoken words and unresolved emotions. This doesn't always mean literal speech. After all, physical conversation is no longer possible in the conventional sense. Rather, it means energetic completion through your conscious intention and spiritual communication. Speaking your truth in meditation, writing letters you'll never send, conducting inner dialogues of forgiveness. These practices help resolve the energetic tension of unfinished business. Spiritual traditions worldwide offer rituals designed specifically to complete unfinished business with the deceased. From Japan's Obon Festival, where ancestors are welcomed back temporarily to resolve lingering concerns, to Mexico's Day of the Dead celebrations that open communication between worlds, these practices acknowledge the need for completing the emotional and spiritual business between the living and the dead. They recognize that resolution benefits both sides of the veil. The profound spiritual truth is that love transcends death, but attachment creates complications. When your relationship with someone who has passed remains defined by what was left unsaid or unresolved, you're maintaining attachment rather than allowing love to transform into its higher spiritual expression. This transformation requires courage, the courage to finally speak your truth energetically, to release expectations, to offer forgiveness, and to accept the imperfect humanity you shared. For souls who have left physical form, the weight of unresolved business feels like an ongoing responsibility they cannot yet set aside. They sense you're holding on through unexpressed words and feelings, your insistence that certain matters remain as they were at the moment of their passing. This holding pattern prevents them from fully embracing the expanded perspective and healing that awaits them beyond earthly concerns. The spiritual mechanics of resolution involve allowing completion rather than clinging to incompletion. This means being willing to energetically finish conversations, release expectations, forgive failings, both theirs and yours, and honor promises in ways that may look different than originally intended. It means recognizing that while physical death ends certain possibilities for expression, it doesn't end the possibility of spiritual resolution. This process isn't about forcing artificial closure or pretending that painful realities don't matter. Rather, it's about allowing a natural completion to occur by bringing conscious awareness to what remains unresolved, expressing your truth in spiritual ways, and then willingly releasing the need for the specific outcomes you once desired. It's about understanding that spiritual completion often looks very different than the earthly resolution you may have envisioned. When you engage in this process of resolving unspoken words and unfinished business, you create spiritual space for both yourself and your departed loved one. You transform the nature of your continued connection from one of binding incompletion to one of loving freedom. This transformation honors the eternal nature of your relationship while allowing both souls, yours in physical form, theirs in spiritual form, to continue evolving as you were meant to do. The final chapter in the journey of mutual liberation between you and your departed loved one involves understanding the power of conscious release. This is perhaps the most challenging spiritual work you will undertake, yet it holds the greatest potential for healing and transformation, not just for you, but for the soul who has passed on. Conscious release begins with the recognition that emotional dependence creates spiritual binding. When your sense of identity, purpose, or emotional well-being remains fundamentally tied to someone who has passed, you create an energetic dynamic that holds both souls in a state of suspension. Your loved one, sensing your continued dependence, feels a responsibility to somehow fulfill needs they can no longer meet in the ways they once did. This creates what spiritual teachers describe as a state of waiting, a soul caught between worlds, unable to fully embrace their continuing journey because part of their awareness remains fixated on your unmet needs. This understanding challenges us to examine the nature of love itself. True love, in its highest expression, seeks the freedom and fulfillment of the beloved rather than possession or control. When someone passes from physical form, the most profound expression of love becomes your willingness to release them from the obligations of earthly relationship. This doesn't mean forgetting them or diminishing the significance of your connection. Rather, it means transforming your relationship from one based in physical presence and emotional need to one grounded in spiritual truth and mutual freedom. The process begins with honest self-examination. Ask yourself, what needs am I still expecting my departed loved one to fulfill? What role in my life am I insisting they continue to play, even though they've transitioned beyond the physical plane? What aspects of my identity or emotional security remain tied to their presence in my life? These questions reveal the subtle ways you may be maintaining bonds of dependence rather than allowing love to evolve into its spiritual form. Many who work deeply with grief describe witnessing how the departed seem to wait for certain loved ones to be ready before fully transitioning to higher spiritual states. This waiting isn't imposed on them by external forces but arises from their own compassion and concern. They sense when someone they love remains emotionally dependent on their continued presence, unable to envision life without them, or unwilling to release them from the obligations of relationship. Their love compels them to remain attentive to this unmet need, creating a divided focus for their soul. Conscious release requires developing a new relationship with memory. When memories become a form of clinging, a way to keep someone perpetually present by continuously replaying the past, they create spiritual density rather than spaciousness. Yet when you allow memories to exist as treasured wisdom and love carried forward, rather than as attempts to recreate what has passed, you transform their energetic quality. The memories themselves become lighter, more translucent, allowing light to pass through them, rather than creating shadows of loss. This transformation involves developing what spiritual traditions call non-attachment, the ability to love completely while holding lightly. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring or loving less deeply. Rather, it means loving with open hands instead of clenched fists, allowing the natural evolution of souls in their respective journeys. It means recognizing that your relationship continues but must transform to accommodate the new spiritual reality you both inhabit. You in physical form, them in spiritual form. Practical spiritual work for conscious release often involves ritual and symbolic action. Creating ceremonies of blessing and release, whether lighting candles, writing letters that are then ceremonially burned, or visiting places of significance to consciously say goodbye, helps translate your inner commitment into tangible expression. These rituals acknowledge the reality of transition and help both souls recognize that a new phase of relationship has begun. The spiritual mechanics of release involve a reorientation of energy. Rather than directing your emotional energy toward trying to maintain the relationship as it was, you redirect it toward blessing your loved one's continuing journey while simultaneously committing to your own. This creates a parallel movement of souls, each honoring the other while moving in their natural direction. The bond between you remains, but it becomes an open channel rather than a tether. Many who have experienced profound spiritual insights after losing someone they love describe a moment of realization, a recognition that their continued grief was actually a form of energetic selfishness. Not because their pain wasn't real or valid, but because they were prioritizing their need for continued earthly connection over their loved one's spiritual freedom. This realization, while initially painful, often becomes the turning point in their grief journey, allowing them to love in a way that liberates rather than binds. Signs that your loved one has been waiting for your release often become apparent once you begin this work. Dreams may shift from portrayals of the person as confused, concerned, or earthbound to images of them appearing peaceful, radiant, or clearly moving towards something beyond your shared past. Physical sensations of their presence, which may have felt heavy or sad, often transform into lighter, more peaceful experiences. These shifts reflect the changing nature of your energetic connection as mutual liberation occurs. The spiritual wisdom traditions teach that souls continue to evolve after physical death, moving through various states of consciousness and understanding. When a soul is held in place by the unresolved grief or emotional dependence of loved ones, this natural evolution is interrupted. By consciously releasing them from the obligations of earthly relationship, you allow them to continue their soul's journey while simultaneously creating space for your own continued growth. This release is not abandonment or forgetting. Rather, it is the mature spiritual recognition that love transcends physical presence and continues to evolve beyond death. The relationship doesn't end, it transforms. The connection remains, but its nature changes from one of need and dependence to one of mutual blessing and freedom. This transformation honors both the eternal nature of love and the ever-evolving nature of souls. The final spiritual truth of this journey is that by releasing your loved one to fully embrace their continuing path, you simultaneously release yourself to embrace yours. The liberation is mutual. As you free them from the obligations of grief, you free yourself from the limitations of unresolved loss. As you bless their journey forward, you create the spiritual space to fully re-engage with your own life's purpose and joy. This mutual freedom becomes the final gift exchange between souls who have shared the sacred experience of loving one another across the threshold that separates physical and spiritual existence. Remember that this process unfolds gradually and with compassion, both for yourself and for your departed loved one. There is no timeline for grief's transformation, no schedule for the heart's healing. Yet by understanding the spiritual dynamics of attachment and release, you can move consciously toward a relationship with your loved one that supports both their continuing journey and your own. This conscious movement becomes not just an act of personal healing, but a profound spiritual practice. The practice of loving beyond the limitations of physical existence, beyond the boundaries of time and space, in the eternal present where all souls ultimately meet. If these spiritual insights about helping your loved ones move on have resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these timeless teachings. Leave a comment below sharing your own experience with grief and spiritual connection. Your words may provide comfort to someone walking a similar path. Remember, by supporting each other through these profound transitions, we create a community of healing and understanding. Subscribe now and join us on this journey of spiritual growth and mutual liberation.